in the district, and we're here to serve you, and that's what we do. I've been doing it for almost 11 years now. On the other side of things, I still work for one of their colleagues, Senator Bryce Reeves in the Virginia Senate, just a little bit. David knows that. Specifically staffing the Military Veterans Caucus. So if you have any issues at the state level as well, you can always reach out.
Good morning, I'm David Blunt. I'm the Deputy Director and Director of Legislative Services at Thompson Jefferson Planning District Commission. And I always appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all this event.
Mel Sheridan, Commissioner of the Revenue now for almost 20 years, and have pretty much lifelong citizen, I guess, other than 20-year stint with the Army. It's just been an honor to work with these gentlemen. Chris, we're going to get to know one another because I've got a veterans issue I'd ask you for before we leave. But with Lee and Rob, it's just been tremendous to work with them as friends. But more importantly, they come with clout, and that's going to be sorely missed in the upcoming, I guess, next election, as we are newly represented by some, individual, whoever that might be. So, feel certain the door will always be open, and we will probably always step through and say, hey, we really could use your help, Rob or Lee, or, and that's been wonderful. It takes tenure to have some real effect down there. So we'll be looking to see in the halls down there. And from my perspective, I've never felt anything but 100% welcomed working with both of y'all's offices, and Senator Peaks to be included in that. And so thank y'all for your help.
Sure. Eric Hess, pleasure of being sheriff here for 9 years in Fluvanna County, and it's been a pleasure working with these gentlemen, and they will be absolutely missed. But hopefully you'll continue your specialism in Richmond and continue taking care of our state.
I'm Perry Johnson, Vice Chair of the Fluvanna County School Board.
Good morning. I'm Pete Kretz, Superintendent of the Fluvanna County Schools. I'm in my 32nd year as a Virginia educator, my 2nd year in Fluvanna. I've been this is the 6th small rural locality in Virginia throughout my career. My wife and 4 children and I live here in Palmyra. So I'm obviously very interested and passionate about what's happening in schools, both because the school board has commissioned me to be so, but also because my 4 children are at the mercy of the decisions that we make. And I'm happy to be here and partner with you guys. So thank you.
Brenda Gillum, Executive Director for Instruction and Finance for the schools. This is my 24th year, and I was 20 when I started.
Brian Muller, the program manager for Children's Services Act here in Fluvanna County. Been doing this for 5 years, and it's been absolute been great working with delegates. I know that some of you all have sat on several committees that have affected the legislation that governs my program. So I want to thank you all very much for your involvement and your ability to help make the Children's Services Act even better than it was 5 years ago.
Morning, Douglas Miles, Community Development Director, and we appreciate David Blount's help and guiding us in the housing, land use, and transportation problems. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Maine. I'm the Director of Social Services. I've worked for 28 years with local departments of social services, and I've been the director here in Fluvanna for 8. Hi, good morning. I'm Florida Melton. I'm the Director of Finance. I've been with the firm for 5 years. Debbie Smith, the Emergency Management Coordinator, and been with Fluvanna almost.
Aaron Spitzer, Director of Parks and Rec. I've been with the county for 15 years, I think, and 6 as director.
Jennifer Schmidt, I'm the Director of Economic Development. I've been here a year.
Never. Kelly Harris, assistant county administrator, the one over here, big old mess. People ask me, what do you do in your job? And I say, I do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. That's what I do.
I'm Eric Goff, Fluvanna County Administrator, been blessed to been with the county now for, gosh, what's going on 11 years now, but in the position of county administrator for 3.5 years. So like I said, appreciate everyone being here today. Thank you.
My name is Patricia Eber. I serve on the board representing Palmyra. And I've been working with the county for about 20 years between the planning commission and the board of supervisors. And I'm sure we're going to miss you very much.
It's very appropriate to end up with the senior of the whole group. Celebrating my 81st birthday on election day. Quite a thrill. I've been on the board for 15 years. And I have one more, I have a year coming up. My husband was on the board for 16 years. So the Booker family has served this community. When I finished, God let me live that long, will be 32 years. I am a grassroots board of supervisors. I'm in the trenches. I touch base with people who serve the community and I love it. And I'm not going to stop once I leave this board until I get to the point where I can't do it. But it has been, these 15 years have gone by quickly. And I've enjoyed all of it. There have been ups and downs, but in the run with this board, all the board I've been on, we work well together. So, and it's so good to have you all here. And I know you're going to continue to do work for the state, good work for the state of Virginia. Thank you.
All righty. Now we had a spot opened up just for some comments from you folks. Rob, I don't know, y'all can decide who goes first.
Senior. It's interesting. He's clear that he's been here twice as long as I have, but I'm senior, but that's okay. And that's fine. That's I have been hanging around for a while too. This is my 25th year in the house. So this past year, I'll start with the budget because that affects so many things, touches so many of our folks. This year, one of our former colleagues, Jason Miares, who's now the Attorney General, said to me as we were going through the process of the budget, this year is like having a unicorn. And it really was. This year, the revenue that came in was unlike any year that I've been there and many years before that. For a variety of factors. The biggest single one, in my judgment, are the enormous amounts of federal enactments that we're sending resources from Washington to citizens, to businesses, to localities, to states. And we were the recipients of that largesse. It's a different question about what that means for the long term, which I'll leave aside for right now. But what it meant immediately was that there was an infusion of money that we had to make decisions on how to deploy. I think on balance, the judgments were good on that. We set aside, we fortified our rainy day fund to the largest amount that it's been. It's over $3 billion when we get through this budget. We brought VRS closer to full funding, put a large chunk in for that. We put money in for the workers' compensation funds to make sure that businesses did not see a dramatic increase in their tax rate on that question. Those were some of the things that we set aside. There are several capital projects that we did that we did not borrow money for, we paid for. We also did some things financially. Those of you in the schools will know that we put in this, and I'm always keen to say it's the state's share of a 5% raise, because I know that means things for you all as you look at what the reality is. For a 5% raise for teachers, similar things in law enforcement. And we just felt like teachers, deputies, school people in various places have worked incredibly hard. And so there was that recognition 2 years consecutively. That is in the budget. And there were a number of other items that we were able to work on in a way that we hadn't substantial. Now, and this is something where Rob is way more knowledgeable than I am, but there was a 140 million put in for mental health in one form or another. Some of it was to hopefully free up a little bit of sheriffs who have to take folks to hospitals and dedicate deputies until they can actually get a bed for the person who may be in distress. And as I say, Rob can expand on that. So I would say this year was a very unusual year in that regard. We will get a full briefing next week on how things look going forward. There are some indications of softening, that the economy is not headed in the same direction that it's been the last 2 years, and that's obviously going to have to make us take a close look at what we have and what we can do as we look at a revision to the budget in the coming year. That'll be an important part of it. I'll leave it there and then kind of give you at least one snapshot of one important element of what we do in Richmond.
Lee touched on many of the big things. I do think we kind of have identified some challenges in the last, we're part-time, so we go down January, February, sometimes it stretches out from the early summer, but then we go home, and what you see is some things that you worried about resolve themselves, and some either get worse or still there. So we sort of just tick off some, I think, things we'll be talking about during session. The first, I think everybody's read, so we got some test numbers back. I specifically about Virginia, their national test figures, but if you will, to review the impact of COVID. So I'm trying to compare the 2019 test figures with those in 2022. And I know we have the superintendent here and school board here, and I'd be interested about how these, we're not able to disaggregate them to the county level. So we have statewide figures. So I would be interested to see if Fluvanna was similar to other places, did better, actually did worse, but regardless, clearly a very significant impact. The scores went down substantially between 2019 and 2022. And so trying to find a way to remediate that, I think, will be a priority. Number one. Number two, we're in a homicide spike. So 3-4 years ago, Virginia fourth lowest violent crime rate in the country. We were very proud of that. We were disproportionate to any similar state. And then we, again, with the results of COVID, we had a real bad year, the COVID year, and had hoped to see the numbers snap back, and they haven't. So something has happened in the same way that the schools didn't suddenly just snap back. And so we are reviewing that. And it took us 20 years to get the rate down. I'm hopeful it won't take us 20 years back to work it out bit by bit. And then third, on the mental health space. So there's been a crisis looming that the sheriff is very aware of, that the private hospitals stopped taking so many of, they're called TDOs, or these temporary detentions. And bit by bit, our bed capacity at the state hospitals went from 90% to 95, to 57 to 101. They stopped. And they said, we just have no more beds. And it's not the physical beds, it's the staffing. So if you're visualizing, why not just build some more? They actually have the buildings, they have the physical cots, but these are very labor intensive. And as we all have staffing problems, these are not attractive, easy jobs. These are hard jobs to maintain mental health hospitals. And so that has led to just a crisis in emergency rooms around the state as the deputy picks someone up. And then where do they go? And where do they go doesn't have anything. So I've been advocating for something which has not been a majority position, which is that we should use the powers of state government to ensure that the private hospitals just go back to what they used to be doing. If they did that, we would have enough beds. Absent that, I saw that the sheriff has a proposal about just finding more state beds. I don't have an answer that's better than that. They're the tip of the spear. The law enforcement people are feeling profoundly stressed by this, and they have said, we'll take them somewhere, but we need a place to take them. So that's sort of where things are.
Did you want to have anything to say, Chris?
Well, I will say, I don't necessarily work on the legislative side in the office, that's not my lane. However, I am a conduit to those folks. If you need to reach them, I can always make that connection. I've done that before. And we'll just reiterate on, the district staff side, the casework. All federal agencies, the biggest being Veterans Affairs, Social Security, IRS, that's where we see the most of our cases. So if you have any constituents who have any issues, feel free to reach out.
All righty. Thank y'all so much. And Mr. Dahl, did you have anything you wanted to start talking about now?
I think one thing I know, Dr. Gretz, I know he put a lot of some good topics forward regarding schools and legislative concerns. So I think maybe we can kind of start with some of those discussions. And I think in front of you, you should have something from the schools regarding their concerns, and that can send out in the yes.
All right, Dr. Rex.
Okay, well,
And you have a copy, you should have a copy, one page like, yep, that's it.
The short page,
yeah.
Thank you.
thank you. What you have are just some notes about a couple of the issues that are on the horizon. And I'll say at the start, I want to make sure I'm not speaking on behalf of the school board. The school board has not gotten together to necessarily approve legislative positions. But I certainly feel confident that I've had enough communication with Ms. Johnson and our board that they support the things that I'll address. Would invite Ms. Gillen or Ms. Johnson to jump in, really anybody. Maybe I should start. I do want to thank you, Delegate Bell. You were going to come to our last school board meeting, and you had passed a resolution recognizing our state champion debate and forensics team. And not only were you going to come present that, but you were going to come and actually sit through a practice. We weren't able to do that. We have experienced a terrible tragedy here with the loss of one of our board members, but I do want to just acknowledge that is very generous of your time, and it really meant the world to the kids and to all of us. I've had the opportunity for going on now 2 decades maybe to work with Delegate Ware in other localities. And you've been extremely supportive and forthright and just great to communicate with and work with, and I appreciate that. And I don't at all want to slight, but I just haven't had the opportunity to work with Bob Good, but I do look forward to that in the future. So thank all of you. I'll just go down. I won't go too long here unless you have questions. Right? The first issue that comes up every year that I'll just address is the support cap. Everybody's aware that in 2010, Virginia was facing a crisis, and in order to weather that crisis, there were positions that were included in the codified standards of quality, which means we all, legislators included, recognize that they were necessary to operate schools. And in order to weather that economic storm, there was a cap placed on how many of those would be funded. And that year alone in Fluvanna, there was a little over $800,000 in burden that fell to Fluvanna to pick up that loss of state funding. And that cap still exists today. It was addressed last year, and I can't tell you what that means to the schools for that to have been moved. And so I'm just simply bringing it up to say that anything we can do to just continue to try to restore that to pre-2010 would be, especially in a small rural place like this, would just be a game changer. It really would. So anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, you've referenced the mental health issues that we're seeing in the community, and certainly those bleed over into the school. And so we are seeing increase in behaviors, some of it related to home situations, others just socialization of kids during COVID. But we use our instructional assistants quite a bit to support the classroom teachers. And prior to this year in the SOQ, we were funded for like 3 instructional assistants, and we employ 70 instructional assistants. So the funding is just not there for that support staff, and it is greatly needed. I just can't say that enough.
Can I ask a question on that? So obviously different, I represent 3, and I use the composite index as a, obviously very loose tied in ability to pay. What is the composite index for Fluvanna at this point?
6.
No, it's 0.4.
0.46.
0.46. Okay,
0.40.
you know, obviously, in theory, that means that the state is covering 0.46 and 46% of the dollars that you spend to get to the SOQs, and then you all can top it off. Do you have a rough estimate of what percentage it actually covers? In other words, how much
Of our total employees?
well, or budget, whatever the service, this is not a,
36,
that's,
be my guess, about 35 to 36%.
there are localities that top off, if you will, a lot, and then there's some with modest ability to do so, largely rely on the SOQs, and I've always visualized Fluvanna as being in the middle of those localities that you, and I represent Almar, Fluvanna, and Green, so I have literally an over 50, close to 50, and
Sure.
substantially below 50.
If you look at the neighboring localities, right now, we're running about third or fourth from the bottom on per pupil expenditure. We were lower, but we have picked that up some, but it's, you know, the issue we run into a lot of times is we're like affluent enough as a community with median income that we don't qualify for a lot of the federal support that's out there. And so a lot of times there'll be some grant that comes up and we'll take a look at it and they're like, well, you don't qualify, or we meet the minimum qualifications, but when they're doing the review of the grant, they're like, well, you're really at the bottom of this. And so this locality is going to get the funding. We ran into that with the bus driver grants. Everybody around us got it but us. And, you know, it's just, that certainly is a challenge for us.
So we have the ability to pay more. In other words, we have a high income at 76 or 73,000.
I think the question he's asking though, last year, we got the 5%. And as you so eloquently put it, the state share of it, because I think we ended up paying almost 60+% more to make that 5% happen. I think that's what you're getting at.
I think I just,
Yeah, I think it's about 35 to 36% the state covers, and then we.
I understand that because of the composite index, ours is in the 60s.
Yeah.
That just from the composite index perspective, they will pay a larger percentage than Fluvanna will pay a higher percentage than.
Yeah.
To do the 5%.
It's the addition above the SOQs is what I'm.
That's what I'm talking.
Right. Yeah.
To do the 5% raise last year for, so it's a little over half of our employees that are included in the SOQs. Barely over half.
Yes.
Yeah. These are round numbers, but about $900,000 is what Fluvanna had to put up in order to get around 700 from the state to do the 5%.
So a kindred point to that question, that the difference between the 3 instructional assistants that you're currently covered and the 70 that you need to carry on. What, in ballpark terms, what would we be talking about? The state that makes up that difference. And if you don't have that today, obviously we're asking a lot of questions.
Fluvanna is paying for all of those additional positions. And so any raise for them, all of that would come from them.
And
it's only the 3 that would be supported by the state, and at 40 cents for every dollar.
And it's like everything else, we're struggling to find staffing. I mean, we had a conversation yesterday with Piedmont because we do a number of dual enrollment classes, and they're like, well, when you hire teachers, look for ones that have a master's so that we can do dual enrollment. And I said, right now, I can't find teachers. I'm not picking through to decide the most qualified. We have positions we cannot fill. We cannot fill school counseling positions. We've had 2 or 3 vacant all year. And a lot of that is tied back to salary.
And if I could speak to that, please. There was a recent JLARC study that found essentially over the summer, Virginia lost 11,000 teachers, hired only 7,000 qualified teachers. And that bears out to an extraordinary degree here in Fluvanna. We lost, prior to this newest school year, about 20 teachers, all fully qualified. We hired 3 that were licensed and qualified by the state. The rest were provisional hires. I don't think that's going to help our test scores. And the JLARC suggested that funding teacher retention would be a big component to solving the problem. And I think personally, fully funding SOQs, state mandated positions, is a good place to start.
Does that level of churn, could you compare it to, let's say, 2018, which trying to pick a day before everything changed?
I don't know. I personally just started keeping track this past summer.
Right, I don't know if that's a number, and I have no idea. That's big,
Mhm.
twice as many as there used to be, half as
Right.
many as there used to be.
Before the pandemic, the big push was fully qualified, and we were 98, 99%
Yeah, it's
fully
com-
qualified
straight up.
professional
The
staff.
teachers who left, you said 20, is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know
I
that,
don't either.
that answer.
One of the things we're seeing when I graph out years of experience is you see, it used to be that we would have a number of teachers that would be well over 30 years, some in, 40 years of experience. And that number is dropping and it's dropping at a large percentage. It's like people are hitting that 30 and they're saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. So that the population of teachers is changing quite a bit.
And here's one thing I'll throw out there. This is something I brought up when we were having our VACO Board of Directors meeting. The message about public education that gets sent, whether they're meaning to or not, it's a negative outlook. So you have parents, like my wife looks at my children who one of them said, "Hey, I want to be a teacher like Dad." And she's like, "Absolutely not. Your dad works all the time." And I've brought this up. We need to have some type of campaign where you have people that have something positive to say about education, whether it's a ad campaign or what. Our teaching age group, if you walk through the building now, we have a lot of young people, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And I'm one of the oldest at 35 years. I mean, there are not many that are more than I am right now.
And I'm a retired teacher and was a principal out of Charlottesville. We've always lost teachers, but we were able to replace them. Now, it's not, we can't replace.
And one of our members of the board of directors, his wife runs the education department at JMU. And they can't fill that education department because nobody wants to get into it, because whether it's by accident or one of those tales that just happened, all you ever hear is how bad public education is, how bad the schools are, how bad discipline is. Well, you're not talking to the right people. There's people who will say bad stuff about everything. And we've got to get a message out there to get kids to get back involved.
And I know sometimes the state will offer these incentives to hire staff, like bonuses to bring people in. But I personally feel like that's a smack in the face to people that have been in that classroom for 20 and 25 years to go, I'm going to hire this brand new teacher out of college and give you another $3,000 for coming here. But I'm sorry you've been here all this time, but and I just do not like those. And that seems to be the answer a lot of times, but I don't think that's the right solution to this.
This may be anecdotal, but are you finding the people that are leaving to go to a different location? Or are they leaving the profession, or is it kind of a mix?
It's a mix. But we definitely in this community are competing with Charlottesville and Albemarle. And we don't have a lot of rental property around here. And so if I'm a young teacher, I'm probably living in Charlottesville and driving in. And then at some point, there's a position that opens up in Charlottesville or Albemarle, and then, I'll just be closer to home. So it's a challenge for us.
That you mentioned the JLARC report. I've had the good fortune to be appointed to JLARC this year. And when that report was being made, there were not a lot of surprises. I don't think many of us were surprised at any of the things they discovered, but to collect it all in one place and have it presented in aggregate form, it's an eye-opening thing to see what schools have been facing and continue to face. And the JLARC includes most of the folks who are senior on the money committees down there, and they were taking it in, and clearly, based on the conversation, I would be surprised if there isn't some continuing movement, as we have funding to at least incrementally move that direction on support. and mental health, school counseling was brought up. And there was a lot of conversation about that.
That's encouraging. Thank you.
So anything else on support cap? That's a great.
Sorry.
No, that's a great discussion.
Yeah.
Restoring that would be, I don't know how else to say it, would be a game changer for us. Similarly, anything we can do, like you just said, to increase compensation for teachers, we've never asked teachers to do as much as I think we're asking now. In terms of the varied spectrum of needs that students are bringing. And the 10% over the biennium is very generous and appreciated. Virginia's still pretty far behind the national average, so I think anything we could do to at least get there would be great. The at-risk add-on, I'll just mention that that's a funding formula that's included in the state budget that recognizes that it takes more resources to educate at-risk students. And the way they're defined is essentially students of poverty, free and reduced rate. So there's a mechanism that adjusts certain aspects of state funding based on your free and reduced rate. You get a little more based on that. I advocate for small rural places. I'm vice president of the Coalition of Small Rural Schools, and that is definitely a passion of mine. But this to me is the most equitable methodology that the state could possibly use. It doesn't differentiate between small or large, urban or rural. It simply says we recognize that to educate at-risk children, you need more resources. And that's been increased. Personally, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that we increased that, I think 2 years ago. But again, Virginia still has a really low, when you look nationally at how other states are handling that. I would just advocate that we continue to protect that and maybe even use it more often. Use that methodology more often to distribute state funds, because it is such an equitable way to do it. And to address the most needy students across the Commonwealth, no matter where they're. I put some notes in there about the new construction rebate program. I don't necessarily need to go over those. I know that sometime following this breakfast, the State Board of Education is going to be addressing that. And I just wanted to mention it because I do think anything we can do, again, to just make these programs more equitable for small rural places that struggle to have the same level of revenue. Virginia did some wonderful work last year to address school construction. It was, from my perspective, it was bipartisan. It was addressing a need that's been out there for a long time. We still have a long way to go. We have a lot of needs, but anything we can do there. Do you have any questions about any of those notes? I'm happy to.
If you were to prioritize, you got 4 bullet points there. If you were to prioritize, what would be the top 1 or 2 of those as we look at it?
I think probably for Fluvanna, I would say the last one.
Okay.
On behalf of small and rural schools across the Commonwealth, I'd say probably the look back period. When I'm thinking about places like Bristol, Virginia, and places like that, I think that would probably be, that's mine. What do you think?
I think Sheriff Hess and I were talking about this before the meeting. As much flexibility as we can get on some of these things, the better. Because every county's dealing with different issues, and sometimes we get grants and things, and we're trying to put a round peg in a square hole, and it's just really a challenge. And we get a lot of grants from the federal government, but there are so many that you can't do this, you have to do that, and then you have to report on it all the time, and it's just so burdensome. And I mean, we spend all our time doing that kind of stuff now. I mean, you guys saw the supplemental appropriation I sent you that said this one's going up and these are going down, and and it's like 15 different things there. It's really hard to manage. So as much flexibility as we can give so that everybody can use it in the way that best works for them, because I don't think anybody's trying to do anything wrong. They're just trying to figure out how to make it work for them.
What I'll mention is just a suggestion. And Virginia, a few years ago, redid its accountability model. It redid it included some things that hadn't been included in the past, one of which is student engagement, which I thought it couldn't have been a better decision for Virginia to include holding schools accountable for engaging students. That's how we're going to address test scores, is to have teachers focus on engaging students. Admittedly, it's a really difficult thing to measure. I think we in Virginia could have done a better job with that. We're measuring student engagement by measuring attendance. Clearly, attendance is important. They need to be present, but the notion that just because a child is in school, that school is engaging, I don't think that is true. However, if that is going to continue to be a measure, I'm more than happy to be held accountable for attendance. I am, and absenteeism. Virginia defines abuse and neglect a little differently than most states do. And in most states, so here's an example. I just gave you an example from South Dakota. Whose parent, guardian, or custodian fails or refuses to provide proper or necessary subsistence, supervision, education, medical care, or any other, and then I won't read the rest. Virginia separates abuse and neglect into different categories: physical, mental, sexual. If we could add a section that just simply something like educational neglect occurs when the child's caretaker permits chronic truancy, defined by 10% or whatever it is. Because I think the issue is not necessarily that schools need to fix truancy. Schools and parents and communities need to come together and make sure that that's happening. And so I think that would protect children, and it would give the relationship that we have with the courts when we do look for that assistance. It's oftentimes not there. So that's just a suggestion. Do you have questions about that? That has nothing to do with funding.
What are you suggesting would happen? I'm the criminal guy, and I would say, and then what, which would be, if that happens, and then what would be your, what remedy are you asking would then be the effective
I think that we could bring parents to the table in the conversation about why kids are not getting to school, especially kids that are primary.
No, I agree. What I mean though is what happens if they don't want to, or they refuse, or they don't comply? What is your thought on?
As far as like, what's the punishment?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's just like with CSA, the community president management team. We set up a plan for the child and the family, and the parents won't even participate. If they don't go to the mentor, if they don't get what they need to do, then we're left with no solution. We don't have anything to make them commit.
So that's why I'm suggesting if we add that, as like other states do, add the educational component, that there's a responsibility for families to make an education as part of that necessary assistance that's offered to children.
And typically when we have kids that we're having attendance issues with at high school, we can track it back to kindergarten when they weren't coming to school regularly. And you can see it from the very beginning. And I think that's the frustrating thing for some of our staff, is they feel like they've worked so hard with some of these families. And then at the end, it's like, gosh, we've tried, what else can we do? But you can almost see it coming, which is the thing that's really disturbing.
I'll put a fine point on this. And just here in Fluvanna, we have students that, as I think as a result of the pandemic and the closure of schools and just the emotional impact of all that, we have students that have been disengaged from schools for 80+ days. We drive to the house, we try to pick them up, we try to engage the parents don't open the door. There's not the arm from the truancy side to compel those children to get in school. What do we do? How do we get them here? I think if we could, I'm not suggesting this is a magic bullet. I'm just saying Virginia is one of the only states that doesn't recognize education as that level of responsibility for the parent to either enroll the child, homeschool the child, whatever would be there. That onus is falling on schools. And as you mentioned, we've got We've got learning loss to address with those kids. And so
I'll follow up with this because I drove the bus through one of the poor parts of town last 2 years. That's a fourth grader. One kid rode the bus about 15 times. And if I didn't bring him to school, literally the elementary school would get on there and say, hey, did you pick him up today? And I'll go, nope. They drive, try to get him. Last year, really simply, I said, hey, what's your favorite candy bar? And he told me what his favorite candy bar was. I said, every day at school, there'll be one in the refrigerator. We're doing whatever we can. But that's just something that we're asking for extra help. One thing for the national level, and apologize for not staying as up to date as this, but we talk about unintended consequences all the time. I know one of the big talks is doing away with daylight savings time. Here's one thought for daylight savings time. That's meaning we won't turn it back in the fall, correct? Next spring, we turn it forward and it just stays there. That means the sun won't come up till about 8:15 or 8:25. That means every one of our kids will be standing in the dark every morning from October through February. No, I'm talking about the dangers of the kids being out there in the dark. I drive a school bus. It scares me to death because some of the stops I have now, I have 9, 10 kids trying to see them coming around the bus. That's an unintended consequence. The more daylight we have with kids on the bus stop, the better off and the better, more safety they will have. That's a national level thing, but that's something that somebody better talk about.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I know it comes up. I haven't really seen any movement on it.
people have talked about it, but well, like I said, whoever's doing it, that's something that they better think about is those kids on the bus ramps in the morning. I make my first stop at 6:45. For the last month, we've been in the dark. Today, it was the daylight. Far safer. Just food for thought.
I got, we had a kid killed in Culpeper when I was.
Yeah, knock on wood, we've gotten much better safety regulations for all bus drivers and everyone. People are much more aware of it. But accidents do happen, and it's just in the dark. I know it scares me to death. I'll just say that much as an old person driving a bus.
Yeah.
All right.
I've just got one more, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
I want to circle back to where we began. Delegate Bell brought up the test scores. We just mentioned that very briefly. I think, frankly, I think this is the most important one. And again, this isn't a budget conversation, but just addressing very quickly the use of the Navy test. I'm fine for that test to be used. I will say that for us, at a local level, it's not a really helpful tool. There's a random sampling of kids that get chosen. They take the test. We don't ever get any data back. Parents don't get any data back. We're not really sure who those kids are or where they are necessarily. So using that data to make decisions, it's a dipstick check, and it's okay. It's fine.
Well, and on the school side, I want you to put yourself in the position of going into a bunch of seniors and telling them that they have to take a test that doesn't count for anything. It is not fun.
But that's not at all to disqualify obviously the storyline is that those tests have decreased across the nation and even more acutely so. Virginia, we can see the average. We can drill down to a county level in Fluvanna. We can see where we are. We're right where the state is. Fluvanna is right where the state. We're a little above in some tests, a little below. The bigger picture I just want to mention. I know that there's a lot of rhetoric right now around that data and the pandemic and learning loss related to the pandemic, pointing to a need to revise the state's accountability. There's talk about the cut scores. I think the governor has tasked the state board with raising those cut scores. I think by the time they sit next year for the test, he's indicated that he wants Virginia's cut scores, meaning the minimum score to be proficient on an SOL test, to be the highest in the nation. I'm fine with that. I know what that's gonna mean across Virginia, but I'm fine with that. It doesn't matter to me where the cut scores go. I just want to just put this on your radar, and I'm speaking for Pete Kretz. Having been part of what's happened over the past roughly 30 years. Part of the conversation that's happening with some policymakers refers to the 90s, in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, as like the golden years. When there was bipartisan hand holding and we're all singing Kumbaya and kids are passing SOL tests. And I'm here to tell you, as principal of a high performing, high poverty middle school, blue ribbon middle school during that time, where we got kids to pass those tests. That was, we should not in Virginia seek to go back there. Kids were not learning and we were not measuring learning. We were addressing SOL tests the same way we might address a child who has a fever. And we want to make sure that they pass their temperature check. You pack them in ice for 20 minutes or you can give them Tylenol. And that's what we did. We pulled kids out. We gave them benchmark tests to predict how they were going to do on benchmark tests, to predict how they were going to do on SOLs. It looked like they were going to fail. We pulled them out of social studies. We pulled them out of science. We pulled them out of band. We pulled them out of art. We pulled them out of carpentry. And we put them in the gym and we drilled and killed them to death. And yeah, they got over the hump. But over the last 20 years, student engagement has gone into the tank. Teachers who are driven to form relationships and make a difference. And again, student engagement, no surprise to me, they're not choosing to be educators right now. And my fear is that as we talk about raising the cut scores, again, which I'm okay with, and using the SOL tests as a dipstick check, I'm okay with that. I just don't want us to incentivize ignoring the things that really matter. And for Virginia to really measure the things that matter, because again, the way we're going to address learning loss is not just to make sure the kids pass their temperature check any more than the way you or I would make sure our kids are healthy by just making sure they had the right temperature. There's a lot more that goes into that. And so the use of growth testing, the emphasis on, again, engagement, making sure that we at a local level, if I can't do anything about the fact that Charlottesville or Albemarle pay what they do, and there's nothing I can do about that. I can make sure that I'm holding teachers accountable for what matters, regardless of what other division we go, and to make sure that teachers are valued for the fact that they build transformative relationships with kids, the fact that they do engaging lessons, that they connect with parents and families. And those are the things I believe that are going to address those test scores. I'm going to do that in Fluvanna, and I believe we're going to get those results in Fluvanna. I just want policymakers that are speaking on behalf of the state to just think about that and reflect about the unintended consequence of going back to a time when we measured school quality, teacher quality, and learning by that low-level simple recall memorization test. That's good.
Well done.
I'll jump in too. If I was around at that point, of course, I've been a teacher for better than 3 decades. And during the 90s, Governor Allen asked me to serve on state board of education. We had that debate about what would we make the SOLs, which were exhortations, tested. And I had principals, administrators, superintendents who came before the State Board of Education and said, we don't want to be measured by the Iowa tests. We don't know where they come from. We don't know where the questions come from. These external tests. We need something where we can do this and make it Virginia specific. And so the SOLs were worked on by a committee of 50 superintendents, directors of instruction, teachers, a few parents, and a few other folks, but Virginia specific. And we put the SOL tests into place. There's some other internal debates about that I won't go into today, take too long. And I didn't agree with the majority or the governor ultimately in how you deployed those, the manner in which we deployed those. But the push was, let's have tests We know where they're coming from. We know what the standards are. And we can therefore make sure that our students are prepared in this fashion. Like anything at that level and at that size, it didn't always work out as intended. But it was set at that point, as you rightly say, it's sort of a baseline. There's no easy way. A NAEP test is one, as you say, measuring stick. SOLs have been, and we've tinkered with those a lot through the years, both us, governors, boards of education in the intervening years. And we've tried to dial back the number of those tests, as you know, over the course of time. It's an ongoing thing, but it's one that I think we also have a responsibility when we dedicate 1/3 of our general fund to K-12 education. When Fluvanna taxpayers pay whatever the percent is in Fluvanna, we have an obligation to say, to make clear that we are providing for those kids an education that's what this community would like to do, to see and to achieve. I think we're on the same page, but it is a huge challenge.
I think Virginia's standards are really, really good. And I don't suggest the tests are not good. I just, a great example, I mentioned attendance. So we're using attendance to measure engagement. Shortly after that was put into the accountability model, one of my colleagues in another part of the state implemented a program where they were going to auction off a brand new car for kids that had perfect attendance. Did it incentivize anybody to start making classrooms engaging? Or did it incentivize us to just get kids through the door? And I'm not criticizing my colleague. I'm just saying, I hope the consequence is that we'll all really bear down. What I would love to see Virginia do is lead the nation in figuring out how to measure what we all want. You ask any parent what they want in the classroom, they want their kid to be engaged. Nobody's figured out how to measure that. We could do that. We could figure that out.
Good.
Thank you. I've been long-winded.
That was wonderful. As an educator. Well done.
All righty.
One thing, one kind of big issue that Fluvanna is going to be dealing with here. We've been fortunate to have robust volunteers for fire and rescue for decades and decades. As no big surprise to other localities, that shift has changed a little bit. About 9-10 years ago, the county kind of went to a model where we had to get a contract crew to start providing EMS services within the county. Now then again, those models, you're seeing fewer and fewer contract crews providing those services. Coming before the board here at the December 7th meeting is for Fluvanna County to kind of transition to paid EMS staffing for the county. Again, a lot of our localities around us already have paid firefighter, EMTs, EMS, but we're going to be transitioning to that piece. There's going to be significant expense to that. Granted, there's going to be some offset from the money that we're paying to a contract crew, but has there been any discussion at the state level? Public safety and other offices are considered, really, important to communities and providing for the health, welfare, and safety. Has there been any consideration to providing any type of funding, towards providing firefighter EMT services within communities as well?
Yeah,
I'm not aware of one. It's not my bailiwick that I see every day, but that's traditionally been a local government issue, but I don't want to pretend it's something I'm an expert on.
I don't serve on the budget committee on appropriations in the House, so I don't see those discussions. I don't recall it, although the conversation certainly is there about the challenge of finding.
Certainly localities, they've got the option to implement a cost recovery, where, specifically for the EMS piece, there's a revenue recovery for the ambulance transport that goes to insurance companies, Medicare, things like that. But, we're going to get to a point from Fluvanna that, what it's going to take to really implement a robust program. The funds that are available are not going to probably come close to covering that. So just wanted to kind of just put that out there again. you know, that's equally as important to the residents of our community, so.
Are you just finding that we're seeing everywhere that just the number of people willing to volunteer is down? In fact, some of the volunteers are often the very people that were doing it, you know, professionally, and then somehow decide that their favorite hobby is also their job. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
they
you know,
do that too. In other words, but there's only so many people willing to do that.
well, yeah, I mean, you know, people are busy with their lives, with kids, and you know, just life is far more complicated than it was, and it's just, you know, we've seen a dwindle in our volunteers. Doesn't mean that we don't have dedicated individuals, but it's still doing that. But it's the shift is going the other direction. So,
And the volunteers are starting to age, and the requirements for training are becoming such a burden.
yeah, and Debbie, didn't you talk about that there was a big shift from the EMS training standpoint too?
Yeah, I think personally, one of the biggest things that's killing us in EMS is that now they're shifting where, I mean, I'll age myself. Back when I started in EMS, I did it in my fire station. I could do it Tuesday night, Thursday night, and some Saturdays and get certified. Now you're making them go to a college. They're coming out with student loans. They don't want student loans. Not everybody wants to go to college. So they're not going down that pathway anymore, and we're not getting new EMS. And the ones that are in are getting out. They're not just moving to other municipalities, they're just getting out of EMS. And we are heading in a fast train in a bad way if we don't fix this EMS issue. And fire is right behind it, but they can still right now still do their fire certification in the fire stations. But EMS, you can't do that anymore. You're making them go to colleges and they don't want to.
What was the rationale for switching it from local stations to the?
I don't know, but they've made it where we cannot do it in station. And they're now having to go to colleges for, you know, a 2 to 4 year degree. They don't want it. It was stuff that you used to be able to do all your certifications in your firehouse and have a really good career. But now you're making them go to colleges, come out with student loans, take classes that they're not, I mean, who wants humanities to go run in an ambulance, you know? Not everybody wants that career path, so I think that is one that's really, really hurting us. If you can help fix that, would be huge.
Even the fire, we had an issue last year where they said that much of the fire is still being done in the fire station, but you need to send a trainer off to get training.
Correct.
And you thought, ironically, COVID, which everybody else started using virtual, this was a place where they said, the observation from the volunteers that we heard from were that they understand that some of it has to be hands-on. You cannot do CPR through virtual, but it was just book learning. The rest of the world has said maybe it's not ideal or perfect, but it's, you know, a whole lot more manageable for these parts. We tried to set up a fund just for hotel money. Just if you're going to go to Farmville for a weekend of training, they said, we get it, no pay, no anything. We just need some gas in the hotel for these itty bitty volunteer fire departments. They just don't have these. You visualize them having bingo money or something.
Right.
They're just there.
Or you gotta have a burn building to go to,
Physical
building.
Yeah.
And part of it's that the requirements continue to slowly ratchet up. And where you might have been a volunteer and been able to have a young family and give it 2 days a month, that's not the case anymore. You're not necessarily career, but the training requirements are a lot closer to what career guys have to do than what volunteers did many years ago when I started riding a horse to the fire station.
Or riding in the back of the hearse.
Riding back in the hearse. I got one thing I'd like to mention. We talk, if I might, no, not about fire and rescue, but we've had that back of the hearse experience, but 50 years ago. I wanted to thank particularly the folks from the General Assembly for the continued support for our comp board funding. It touches all of us. It touches our constitutional officers. I guess maybe as much as anyone, and y'all have been very supportive of career development, master deputy, career prosecutor programs. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. a great deal to make additional funding available to those staff members that are able to pursue and get those additional certifications. Y'all know about it. I won't belabor. There's a second point I did want to make. But thank you for that. The compensation award isn't 100% funded, but they are much closer than they were 10 years ago when we would get a staff member, deputy, whatever, certified as a master deputy commissioner of revenue, master deputy clerk of the court. But then they had to wait on a list for 3 years before any funding might become available, and you have to work your way down the list to actually get, there's a tangible benefits, additional money, but there's that intangible of being a better employee. And that really pays their citizens, not just Fluvanna, but really across the Commonwealth. It pays a lot of dividends in that. So thank you all for supporting the board. I'm gonna bring up one thing that's
I hate to interrupt you. I got to go to a doctor's appointment. I apologize. I got to end this meeting. My advice, don't get on a scooter on vacation ever, or you end up breaking your arm. Can I have we're going to have to adjourn our meeting, but y'all are going to continue because I've got to leave and we won't have a quorum. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn this meeting. Second.
Yeah, we can, the board can still have the discussion again, I mean,
Yeah, that's it.
I think it's one way or the other because we're not taking any formal action.
Right, we're not taking any formal action, so we're just going to close our board meeting because I got to leave.
Okay.
Motion made by Ms. Booker, seconded by Ms. Seeger. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, chair votes aye. Motion passes 3-0-2. I do apologize, but like I said, please don't ever get on a scooter in Bermuda.
Oh, you're right.
They're right.
Maybe you let your wife drive. Maybe that's real lesson here. Let your wife drive.
You absolutely don't have.
I'll just get back to it for 60 seconds. This is an old topic, but boy, it's continuing to come home. The PPTRA, Personal Property Tax Relief Act funding. Okay, so I'll turn the clock back. I know that I believe y'all are familiar with it at the state level, but yeah, and here's the dynamic, and it was a great campaign thing. Like in 98, I think, and it worked. And the state agreed to pick up the majority of the cost of their personal property, cars and trucks. Around this room, every single person in here probably pays personal property taxes on a car and truck. But what's happened, without belaboring it, is that we started, I think in 08, it got topped at 75% of your personal property was going to be paid for by the state, and you don't have to pay 25%. That was when cars cost $15,000, and so we've rolled the clock forward to 2022. After it got capped, I'm preaching to the choir, but I don't know if there's any movement down there. The choir being our General Assembly, we are now in Fluvanna at about 32% of the cost of your personal property costs, cars and trucks, being picked up by the Commonwealth, which is still appreciated, but it's a far cry from the original 75 where we got capped, and it declines every year. And it declines because in Fluvanna, we have an increasing population, and everybody knows with the cost of new vehicles and the astronomical increase in used vehicles. Now you don't buy cars for less than about 50,000, pick up 65, 70,000. And that's just the standard Ford Chevrolet kind of Toyota. And if anything can be done to potentially increase that cap on PPTRA, and this might be a subject that's just taboo to bring up in Richmond, but I know that everything costs money, and I realize there's a cap in place that has now been in place for almost 20 years, not quite 20, but almost 20. That would be a great deal of help to literally every citizen, every taxpaying citizen. Not everybody owns real estate, but I think it's a fair statement that about everybody has a car and truck or something that you pay personal property on. So as we have those occasional windfall unicorn kind of tax, revenue years, once every, 30 years maybe. If that could be, that lid on that box could be opened a bit, and maybe I know every locality would appreciate an increase in the cap that we have for PPTRA. Particularly those dynamics where, maybe your county has grown faster than the other neighboring counties, et cetera. That PPTRA issue it's now we're approaching 30%, and nothing's going to change that except increasing the amount of state revenue that's applied to it. And I know it's maybe one of the 800-pound gorillas in the room when y'all meet.
This was not an unintended or unidentified consequence, because I remember when it went through, those of us who represented at the time, a long time ago, I think it was Fluvanna was second, Green was fifth, fastest growing locality in the state. And since the amount was capped and then assigned to localities, as each year went by, you're going to see an increasing disconnect. Fluvanna got its pot of money and was growing, and that meant each taxpayer was going to get less and less. And it's been a long time. My recollection is a couple of years in, as it went from theoretical to actual, I believe I had a bill or a budget amendment that said they should at least realign it every 2 years. And what you would expect to happen, which was those that were slower growing, said not with our money, you won't. And that was kind of anything involving the composite index. Because there are winners and losers, it's not that it's untouchable, but it's hard to get to 51% that will support it. And people just look at it without any high theory. They just say, do I win or lose under this? And if they lose, and Dave's kind of nodding his head, they just say, no, not going to do it. I mean, very interesting. Those are very thoughtful comments, and we should have a nice cup of coffee, but we are not going to agree to something that means the amount of that pie that is distributed to my locality comes down. I used to have it's a long time since I thought on this issue. There were two things that made you a loser in terms of as the years went by. One was high growth. I think the other was what you'd identify, which is value of the car.
Right.
Because it's not 70% of the value of the car, it's 70% of the person. I think it's 20,000.
20,000.
Yeah, so 70 at the time it was 70% of the first 20,000. But again, it was forever capped. And so each year that goes by, inflation reduces it overall. And then in addition, places that afford expensive cars and or places that have high growth. And I always thought I had some of the double Fluvanna and Green were going to lose either coming and going.
And we have.
Yeah.
And couldn't agree with you more. You're exactly right. Again, it's rolling the clock back almost 20 years, but we got $2,996,000 and some change in 08, and that's exactly what we'll get in 23, even though the value of the used vehicles particularly and new vehicles, I guess, has grown by about 300%. The only thing that will change it was a reconfiguration of that formula. We were second fastest growing county to Loudon percentage wise as the lake was building out during those high growth years in the early 2000s. So it would be a great deal of relief if there were to be any relief. It may be a mountain just a little too high to climb because you got to have them.
You've identified an 800-pound gorilla. There are 95 counties.
Yep.
All of them feel this in one way or another. And when you multiply the numbers that would be necessary to include Fairfax, Virginia Beach, Loudoun County, as well as our county, it's a staggering sum.
I felt like I need to bring it up because it's a big revenue issue for us. And I'll tell you, I would imagine y'all's offices even got calls about the assessments of personal property. We are finding citizens now that are paying more for their personal property than they are for their real estate because the value of the, you'll buy a reasonable pickup, Ford XLT, crew cab. You can pay $75,000. So when you do your personal property taxes for that and your automobile, it's higher than the taxes you pay for the house you live in. So I know times have changed. PPTRA is one of the really small, items that would help everybody, not, if we were ever to adjust the the caps that are placed on the counties back in 08. As the dynamics have changed through growth, you gotta have enough people vote for it. I appreciate it, but there you go. I'll leave it laying on your table as just one of those big items.
Going back to the other thing that you mentioned on the compensation board. A couple of years ago, I asked JLARC to do a review of it. I wasn't serving on JLARC at the time. It didn't make the cut for a study for constitutional officers compensation, which I know is another one that hasn't drifted down as the numbers of your deputies have increased. You're supplementing that. When I carried the bill 2 years ago, the Treasurers Association and the Commissioners Association asked not to be included in the study for reasons distinctive to those offices. So when I've asked for it this time, I've done the same thing. I've asked for the clerk of the court, for the sheriff, and for the Commonwealth Attorney's offices to be considered in that. And I'd certainly be open to including, and I'm sure there'll be that discussion with the commissioners and the treasurer. But that's been my request, because I know Commonwealth attorneys are with the body cam footage and so on, that they're now being required to consider with the work that you all are doing at so many levels. That has fallen out of touch with the reality on the ground.
Two things I would address with that is the one deputy per 1,500 population isn't being met throughout the state, and it's in our county would be 2 more funded deputies by the comp board. And the year before, the state mandated the medical dispatching. We had to hire 6 dispatchers, but we didn't get any additional dispatchers from the comp board side. So that was a mandate throughout the state. So everybody had to hire those additional staff members. That is, I've given you the handout from the Virginia Sheriff Association, and that's top of the list under budgeting. We've already talked about mental health. Last month, we had 3 24-hour PCOs that never made it to the ER. So that was somebody that never got the services that they needed. The other thing would be when they bring up some of the bills, revisions of some of the bills that took away some of our primary offenses for being able to stop vehicles and made a very big impact in most communities in the ability to stop people. And the headlight, the taillights, the inspections and stuff like that. All of it within reason, but it's really you got a DUI and you have somebody speeding, which is speeding is proper most primary offense that we stop people for. But if we could address some of those other things, we could really facilitate our drug interdiction with a lot of that. So if the Sheriff's Association is going to bring up all these things, and we'd like any kind of support we could get.
Rob knows this way better than I do, but I'm going to say one thing. When the debate came on those, with taking those away, this was the champion for saying no. The practical effect of that is awful. He made the case amazingly. I'll let him continue with the case. He was our go-to guy,
but unsuccessful. I mean, in other words, at the time there was a majority that felt that it was time to roll those back. And there are things called unintended consequences, and the other not unintended. It's not the reason they're doing it, but it is an expected, predictable outcome, which we all know at the time. And the decision was made that the trade-offs were sufficient, and those of us who voted no were in the minority. Now, I'm hopeful that there will be some willingness to review what has happened and amend what was done. And if that's true, I doubt it will be all the way back to the way it was, given sort of just the way the legislature works. I have to say, last year we had a bill to do what you described. It was passed the House, was rejected by the Senate. So I don't want to give you false expectations of how likely it is to pass. But certainly there are those of us who didn't like it at the time, didn't think it was a good idea, and now in practice have what has happened in practice has confirmed some of our concerns. So
yeah. So the full funding of the comp board, I think that's very important. It really helps the communities that the county picks up. We have 43 deputies, sworn deputies right now. But, you know, the county picks up a majority of.
Yeah, we pick up probably 2/3 of overall personnel benefits costs for comp board funded positions. You know, we certainly supplement above and beyond what the comp board provides for comp board funded positions. You know, the county, in addition to not funding the career development program for comp board funded positions, the county is now paying for those individuals that have the certification. They're also paying for the CPD as though the comp board would. So I mean, the counties are certainly picking up far more of the dollars associated with those positions. So, you know, any increase in that, I know Baco's looking at this position as well, getting information and trying to really get a good grasp on, you know, what is really the effect that the county has and the responsibility of the county now to fund those positions, because the comp board funding in a competitive marketplace, it's not adequate.
Just to add on to that, it is very clear, Fluvanna, we're pretty blessed. I mean, I'm candidly, our board, comp board funding is just a part of the revenue stream. We couldn't hire anyone if we had to hire with only the comp board authorized salary. And our county for many years has augmented that to the point it's carrying most of the load now. Whether it's full-time salaries, career development. Comp board breaks down into 3 categories. You have authorized that are funded, you have authorized that are unfunded, and then there is not unauthorized or not authorized, which is touches every office, because we simply know you need more people to do the work than the comp board is allowing us by their numbers to have. So those counties that, and there are still those counties that are surviving on comp board funding alone. And I thank the good Lord every day Fluvanna is not one of them, because we actually have authorized positions that are unfunded by the comp board. They know we need them. They don't have the money. So our county has picked up a larger part of that than the comp board pays. So I know that they would probably continue to push for extra dollars, but if we ever got on much harder times and they had to cut out a part of the local funding, we would probably drown. Frankly, we just wouldn't have the money to hire the quality staff that we have. Anything you can push in their direction to augment the additional dollars they need for authorized funding is greatly appreciated.
Ms. Booker, Ms. Eager, do you have anything of a particular interest?
No, most of everything that's been said has been well said, and I support that. And as being a former educator, I just agree with, you know, everything that Dr. Gretz has said, and it's just exactly what we need. And everybody's working really hard.
I have a concern about energy. We're getting a very large solar farm, 1,700 acres, which is huge. And how do y'all feel about that? We don't have answers as to the safety or how we're going to get rid of the panels, or how our children are going to get rid of the panels. And I don't know where the state and the federal government, where they are. Is this a good thing? Are we supposed to just embrace it without the facts? And I don't know, can you help me out?
This is another policy akin to what Delegate Bell was saying about the unintended consequences on things going forward on law enforcement. This was one that came through, and both of us were on the other side of it, but there was a decision made a couple of years ago on the passage of the Clean Economy Act that Virginia would go towards a completely non-fossil fuel production by 2045. I don't think it's feasible, and it was interesting to me. I was at a workshop with the energy committee that both of us have served on at one time or another. I continue to serve on. And the Governor Northam's chief of energy was there. He's also continued now as Governor Youngkin's chief of energy. And I'm going to quote him exactly because I got him to repeat himself. He said the theory that we can run on solar plates, wind turbines, and battery entirely remains a theory which has not been authenticated.
Yes.
That's a very serious assessment by a man who's in a position way beyond mine, in addition to the safety questions that you quite properly raised. I am very concerned about it, and I'm very concerned about what it's going to mean for ordinary ratepayer as we see there's already a $2 billion cost overrun on the wind turbine project projections offshore, which are to produce a great amount and a good deal purportedly of Virginia's capacity. You have reason to be concerned. I too share that concern about having the base load capacity that we need for energy for a lot of reasons, both for citizens, for businesses, manufacturing. We have manufacturers who are very intense at energy use, and the costs for them are, there are those that are considering relocating if things get out of hand in terms of the cost.
You know, I was looking on Google one day, and this guy that's a multi-billionaire has been predicting for the United States about energy and environment and so forth. And he said the same thing that you said. We depend on solar, the wind, so we're heading for disaster. And I listened for a good while and it made sense. Of course, you know, I don't do a lot of reading and I'm not very knowledgeable, but what he was saying made a whole lot of sense. And it's just to hear you kind of repeat the same thing, it kind of reinforces what I heard. Do I have a position on it? Not yet. It's just too much to learn.
Taking me a long time
Yeah.
to get.
But you know,
Mhm.
to follow up on Ms. Booker's, on Ms. Eager's point, it's just really been a shotgun approach by solar companies, in particular smaller private ones, to gain a footprint, you know, and it's not certainly just Fluvanna, it's across our Commonwealth. They've got a really large solar farm in Powhatan, where, you know, Delaware, not too far from your house, I think, and they're everywhere, but you know, the language in state code is pretty new, and it's got about 10 sunset requirements in it, depending upon when they were initiated. There's a delineation between whether they're private or if they are a public utility solar system. So the information we tend to be getting back is that a number of our utilities company are allowing the private utilities to carry the load through the local permitting process or SUP process, and then eventually get handed back to repurchased by the utilities, whether it's Dominion or whomever. And it is very uncomfortable for, I'm sure, a number of boards. I know a lot of commissioners who are tasked with trying to figure out how to assess these things, but the future anticipation of how do you dispose of these fields if they simply walk away from them. You know, it's you got a 1,700 acre solar panel field, and they decide it's just in their best interest at least to walk away from it and take their hit, you know, in court. The landowner's got to figure out how to dispose of these. They say the problems with erosion that are associated with every county I've talked to has had a concern about erosion and so forth of the surrounding landowners. Just as we go forward, I guess we look to the state for the code language that helps clarify for us what we have to do with respect to trying to assess and tax it for some local revenue. We've got our hands around it, but it's kind of like squeezing Jell-O initially because it's just so new to us. And did they start prior to January of 22, and did they start prior to January of 19? They've got to get their hat in the game before January of 25. we are talking to a lot of my counterparts. It seems like we're all trying to get in front of it, but it is, there's a lot of different directions localities are going to try to do just that, get in front of the taxation piece, the regulation piece, the maintenance, and in subsequent 30 years from now, maybe the restoration of it back to me, I would think it's been pretty clear with, you know, like stone companies, quarries in general, when you move out of the area, when you still no longer have a lease or you vacate that, you have to restore it to its, you know, previous environmental state. And I just don't know that our individual landowners are able to grasp that. As somebody says, I'd like to put a 30-year solar farm on a lease on your property and hope your grandchildren can figure out how to restore the property from the condition will be in then, because we'll all have moved on. It would look like to me any attempt at any help at the state level with regard to these solar efforts to require a restoration of the property once it becomes obsolete for solar purposes back to its original condition would be very helpful, because they're so dang on big now. They're not 30 acres, they're not 55, they are 17, 18, 2,000 acres, you know, facilities.
That does to the environment too, in the case that it's 1,000 acres or whatever, that there's not a tree growing on it, and what does it do to wildlife?
Well, look, we Senator Reeves carried a bill in 2019 to enact the bonding requirement by the solar companies when they develop these properties, and the government industry came out against it.
Shut it down.
I get a call
No,
at least
no
10
doubt.
times a day about solar. I get a call at home like 10 times a day about solar.
They really are targeting.
No, they want to get put on. a house.
Around it.
No, that's residential.
Yeah.
Residential is pretty clear for us, you know, it's tax-free. We're gonna leave it. Fluvanna's board saw that coming 15 years ago and put a tax exemption on residential solar. And it's in code now, it's codified, so that's helpful. We're just talking about these really large commercial facilities that in many cases now, and not just one landowner, it might be 25 affected landowners who's are being asked to commit their property by lease. And it worries me greatly, the restoration of the property.
Is there no bonding?
There is a concern about compaction of soil. Both the Farm Bureau and even the solar folks who are advocating and working on it acknowledge that restoration could be a very serious challenge, maybe even beyond what can be done from both the runoff and the compaction standpoint. But let me come back, Mel, to your so are you looking, do you need more statutory help to establish the value, or is that something that?
Well, we're talking, the commissioners collectively are trying to very quickly get in front of this. What's happening is we've all had to try to get in front of it. You know, you've got the land piece, you've got the improvement piece, you've got the opportunity to look at it from a revenue sharing perspective, and that's statutory, which is very helpful versus some machinery and tools, you know, because again, are the solar panels permanent improvements? Are they machinery and tools like personal property? Well, you negate that by simply going, you know, revenue sharing, and that we are. Mr. Miles is back over at planning. He's been eating up, I suspect, about daily. It's just been a massive push by the solar industry. And of course, they're pursuing the rural areas, because you can't put one in the city necessarily, but you can certainly put 2,000 acres over on the James River somewhere, and it's Commonwealth wide. So yeah, the sunset language, and you open up the state code is helpful, but I think you've seen a lot of these public utilities avoid the initial problems with that by hiring the private firms to fight the battle for them. And that's, you know, and I realize that's the way it works best for them. What concerns me the most, we'll get a handle on the taxation piece. We'll figure that out. I think we have figured it out. And it's not rooftops. But, and that's an advantage. I really greatly worry about the restoration piece whenever they, excuse me. I don't think they will get to the excuse me, to the limitations of the lease. I mean, these are 40-year leases, some of them. I think technology will change so greatly in the next 15 years that they'll be abandoned now, like my cell phone's not the same thing I used 15 years ago. And I think the landowners, and by extension, local governments, are going to be stuck with a monstrous decision on how to remove these facilities and possibly.
There's some parallels to dams. I don't mean the great big ones that generate a lot of power, but a lot of dams got built in conjunction with an HOA, and then over time, eventually something has to be done. They have a lifespan, and this, I'm sure you have occasional calls about. We're a tiny subdivision, we've got a big pond, we've got a dam that is not meeting, what should we do? And we go, this is, there's no, I hope they did something ahead of time to plan for it, and they're saying we didn't. Four homeowners between the people who made the decision and us, and now we don't know what to do.
I mean, we had that very same thing. We had a private dam here on someone's property, and Governor Youngkin had to issue an executive order that allowed Fluvanna to basically take the project on and decommission it. And it was, upstream from the Dominion plant down there on the James River, and it was a big undertaking. But again, property owner couldn't do anything about it. Having some of the state and federal agencies and the oversight that goes into that was so far behind, it became became a locality issue. Now, granted, we were reimbursed for the cost, but there's some indirect things that are hard to quantify sometimes.
Well, I'll put a point on it. The removal and restoration of solar fields will be a major challenge in the future. And maybe we could get ahead of with language that would address that. And I think the potential for them to be abandoned and left at the landowner's doorstep is far greater than what we can anticipate now on the front end. Because again, they aren't small fields. They're pick a county, Essex, King and Queen, looking at 2,000 acre fields. We're looking at 1,700 acre fields. Yeah, 2,000 and Fauquier spot. It's all over the Commonwealth, and we may not have to deal with it, but it's going to have to be dealt with. And I don't think there's a solar field that will survive 30, 40 years of new technology, and nothing lasts that long. They all revert to something else, and so the potential to walk away scares me a lot. And leave it at the landowner's discretion to do what they think is best.
Is there a bonding that we could do?
Senator Reyes carried that bill in 2019.
But it just
government industry just destroyed that.
Can
There's
it be
no
reinstated?
specific quantified dollar amount as far as bonding for decommissioning.
Can the state think about that again? Revisit
Carry
it?
the bill every year until it passes.
Because without that,
We talked
you
about
have
it in our
no.
polls.
they just haven't had the votes to pass it. I think it's what it really boils down
I mean,
to.
essentially, you take the locality from
Right,
an LLC that's going to dissolve when they stop making money.
exactly.
This would be an example, would be if this is
I think
your
it was
highest priority. Then that I think would have more suasion than if it's the list of 20. The problem is you've given us a list of 20.
Yeah.
And so I think I would, same thing I tell anybody who has an issue they're interested in, I say, help us help you. You having a list of 20 things means you'll get some of the 20, maybe not the ones that are most important.
You want us to prioritize.
Yeah, it just always,
Yeah,
and
right.
if you say this is the single most important thing, it doesn't mean necessarily it'll pass, but at least that'll catch our attention, whether that's most important. And you are part of some groups like VACO that full-time lobbyists, and they come down to Richmond, they keep everybody apprised. But you just have to decide. I'm not telling you what should be your priority. I'm just saying that if this is there, at some point, tell us that as opposed to.
Yeah, I think what we could do, this is probably a good,
Don't do everything.
a good discussion for the board to determine what is maybe the most pressing issue to pass on to you all, to see if there's something that you could a good champion on behalf of the county. Any other issues from other staff members or anything to bring up while we're here? School board, any in schools, any other issues, any pop-ups, sheriff? Well, I think in an effort of time, again, we had this scheduled from 10 to, from 9 to 11, you know. We added an extra half an hour because last year, I think previous years, we were running a little short at that 10:30 mark. So just to give ourselves a little extra time, we went a little bit longer, but I know everyone's always good with the meeting ending a little early and getting on to their day. But again, you know, I certainly on behalf of Fluvanna County, I want to welcome everyone. I want to welcome you all here today to hear Fluvanna is concerned and again, you know, we'll certainly discuss this with the board and see what is the most pressing issue that we might be able to get your assistance on. And Mrs. Booker, Mrs. Eager, anything, any final remarks?
No, thank you all so much. Thank you.
And any final remarks from Delegate Bell, or from Mr. Snyder?
It's always very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for what you do for Fluvanna. Thank you very much. And like I said, and I guess school board, no adjournment needed. And I think if it's okay with everyone, we're at 10:42. We will adjourn the meeting.